personage
Yeah.
of politicians as sort of like a receptacle
It's
of
not just
their
politicians.
emotions.
It's not
Yeah.
just politicians. It's musicians. It's rock stars. It's if you think about I think it's anybody where
Hey,
you
I'm gonna
see.
I'm gonna grab my light here for a second because the sun's going down and I'm losing my natural
Go for
light.
it.
So give me 1 second.
No, go for it. Go for it. Look, I think it's pretty much anybody, man. If when you're looking at musicians, I've seen people like break down looking at Michael Jackson. Like Michael Jackson goes and the people start breaking down and crying in front of him and so forth. Politicians, musicians, rock stars, artists, actresses, all these people, when you're in the public light and you're in the public light often.
I know people get very upset when they can't see my beautiful face. So.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. I'm flipping you back on. Yeah, man, when
Okay.
you're in the public light, I think people invest certain things into the person when they see the person all the time. It's like, oh, I've seen that guy around like every day. And as if seeing him around every day allows you to know the person. I mean, media does this. Look at Shaq. Shaq is selling back cream. Why? He was around. I grew up with Shaq. I know who Shaq is. Not Pat Sajak. What's the guy? Tom Jones. Tom Jones is selling something. Why? Because Tom Jones was around during the time they were growing up and they feel like they know Tom Jones.
Shaq is selling a new product like every week, I think.
Shaq is an entrepreneur, man. He's out there. He's out there.
I've been starting to see like YouTube ads featuring him selling this like system where you can monitor your house while you're away on your phone or something. Like he's even into that,
It's not even just back cream anymore. He's like, look, I'm rich now. I need to protect my house. You need to protect your house too. Here's this device. Yeah. So let's get to Russia stuff. We've been running out about politics. I can talk about politics all day. I love it. So two articles came out with the Russia stuff, and I was like, I got to talk to Michael Tracey about this. He's the guy that knows. So the first one had to do with Joseph Mifsud. Jim Jordan took Mueller to task. I'm pretty sure you watched every jaw-dropping bit of the exciting, gripping 6 hours of the Mueller investigation of the hearing.
Unfortunately, I did. Yes.
So Jim Jordan takes Mueller to task. Now, one of the things that I was like, well, at the very least, there are problems in the Mueller report. You can at the very least ask Mueller. But what did Mueller say when Mueller started? I am not going to say anything different that is in this report. And if I do say anything different, it's just kind of an artifact. Everything that I'm saying is coming out of the report. I'm not budging beyond the report. And even when they thought they had him saying something beyond the report, Mueller came back in the second session and said, if I said this, that was an accident. I didn't mean it in those terms. Meaning, Mueller just said, I'm staying within the confines of the report. Democrats take that and says, all right, after this, now we have what we need to impeach. What the hell are you guys talking about? What do you mean what do you have to impeach? Mueller just said, I'm not saying anything beyond the confines of the report. It seems like they're just looking for any reason to impeach. They try to impeach for a tweet. They try to impeach for being racist. Jake Uger is out here screaming that they should impeach because of, what did he say? They need to impeach because of obstruction of justice and something that he didn't like. The hush payment, the hush money to a porn star. And I'm like, that's what you're going with? That's what you got in your gun? And I read the entire article. It's short. There's one paragraph, because my thought was, all right, if you're telling me that you need to impeach, you better give me some damn good reasons for why you're going to impeach the president. And I see, hush money to a porn star. All right, that's kind of thin. I'm not really going to put that to the side. And then obstruction. And it's like, but obstruction of what? Obstruction of what? So you watched the entirety of the hearing. I watched bits and pieces of the hearing. Did Mueller tell us anything different than what was in the Mueller report?
Mueller was actually extremely obfuscatory. Obfuscatory? Is that how you pronounce that word? He was obfuscating. He was obfuscating to a large degree because it almost was like Mueller did not have the courage of the convictions about the report that he supposedly wrote. I mean, I think a lot of people concluded after that testimony that Mueller was actually really not that involved in the actual drafting of the report because he seemed almost oblivious about key facts contained within it. So, for example, on the issue of Mifsud,
who is Joseph Mifsud? Number one, who is Joseph Mifsud?
Well, that's what you would want to ask Robert Mueller.
Yes,
Robert
Mueller is what you want to ask Mueller. But Mueller doesn't want to answer that question.
Robert Mueller devoted a huge section of Volume 1 of the Mueller report to Joseph Mifsud and his interactions with George Papadopoulos, right? So even if you took him at his word, and Mueller was not going to go outside the confines of what was contained within the report, that would still enable Mueller to comment on Joseph Mifsud, at least the details that were put forth in the report. But Mueller would say not anything at all about Mifsud. Now, why?
It's strange.
Because there are still outstanding issues about how Mueller, his team anyway, dealt with Mifsud. Mifsud was never charged for false statements, even though in the report that they say that there was, conflicting, that Mifsud had made conflicting statements, right? What was his background? Did they look into how he ended up initiating contact with Papadopoulos?
Well, and there's one big point. Mifsud worked with our own intelligence. I mean, the report has Mifsud as if he's a Russian asset.
Yeah.
Mifsud is not a Russian asset. A Russian asset wouldn't even work with U.S. intelligence. I mean, that's a massive omission. Am I wrong on that? I mean, that seems...
Well, they said that he has connections to Russia, which is almost a weasel word, because a connection is almost in the eye of a beholder.
Yeah.
You and I can be claimed to have a connection. Yeah.
I know a Russian. Yeah.
But it's almost as if, like, I was in Russia and somebody doing some kind of ill-conceived criminal investigation decided to rope me into it by claiming that I have connections to the American to the American government, because at various times over the course of my life, I have spoken to people in various capacities who were in the United States government.
It's strange. I mean, it's really bizarre. I mean, and Jim Jordan, whatever you want to think of him in a political sense, has every reason to say, who is Joseph Mifsud? Why are you saying that this guy was some kind of Russian asset when it looks like he was working for intelligence? And beyond that, you indicted everybody else for the most, basic or most tepid of omissions.
Yeah.
Why is
Mifsud why is it only? And why is it? Here's something else people should think about. Why is it only Jim Jordan, Devin Nunes, and a handful of other Republicans who evince any interest in the background of somebody like Joseph Mifsud, who, at least according to Mueller, is the person who precipitated the entire Russia investigation, which engulfed the country for 2+ years, and which the Democrats now want to impeach based on.
All of it started with Joseph Mifsud. All of it. Because
shouldn't everybody, regardless of how you feel about Trump or Papadopoulos or Russia or anything, be interested just in getting to the bottom of how Mifsud was in a position where the FBI and Mueller can now declare that he was the entire reason why the country underwent this?
Because
but it's still, I mean, it's still, the interest is still only confined to this like narrow section of the punditocracy, which is usually right-wing people, and then a couple of members of Congress who are Republicans. Everybody else doesn't seem to care, which to me is just bizarre. Like, I feel like just as a matter of civic transparency, we should want maximum amount of information about who this person was and how the FBI came to determine that his interactions with Papadopoulos ought to serve as the entire basis for this never-ending ordeal.
I mean, just so we're clear, Papadopoulos say the information I got about the Russia stuff came from Mifsud. All right, who's Joseph Mifsud? I mean, because if Joseph Mifsud turns out to be having any type of intelligence asset or any type of interaction from the standpoint of intelligence, this whole thing gets a whole different tint to it. I mean, it seems like this will be an extraordinarily big deal. They've launched an investigation for the last 3 years, what amount to be a conspiracy theory for 3 years, that has put people in prison, that has engulfed all sorts of foreign policy problems between the United States and Russia. And the media are non-curious about this. Like, that's extraordinary. John Solomon on the Hill has been extremely good work on kind of digging into the Mifsud thing. And Solomon comes up and says, Durham has a deposition from Mifsud. Mifsud is talking. And Mifsud's lawyer comes out and says, I was pushed by the FBI to do this. Now, we know that there were honeypots around Papadopoulos. We know that Halper, all of these people were essentially circling around Papadopoulos, asking him, are you working with the Russians? Are you working with the Russians? This type of stuff. It looks bad. I mean, if it's true that Mifsud was an intelligence person, and in a particular way, I don't know how, and Mifsud gave Papadopoulos this story, And then immediately, all of these people are circling around Papadopoulos asking him, are you working with the Russians? I don't necessarily think Papadopoulos is insane of saying, it looks like they were setting me up. And I think that's a big goddamn deal from the standpoint of wanting to get to the bottom of it, whether it's bogus or not. We've been wrapped, this has taken over the country for 3 years. We should know the truth.
Yeah. And I think a part of the reason why there's relatively little interest in getting to the bottom of the whole Mifsud episode is because there should be a growing awareness that Mifsud wasn't really the beginning. There was a concerted effort on the part of elements within the national security state to target Trump in some respect. And I'm not saying that it was this deep state plot in the way that Hannity would talk about, but there was something there that you could characterize as remote, as deep state-ish, and so if Mifsud then became the cover story, then there would be a vested interest in not being forthcoming with that information, or else you could be embarrassed by the entire impetus for the investigation really not being what they've claimed it has been.
Yeah.
It was something else. If there was like a political motive at its genesis, then that's going to make a lot of people look really bad, and it's going to vindicate Trump in a respect.
That just make him look bad. That's like, you're talking about illegality. I mean, like, we're going beyond just, look, I think people sometimes act within their levels of power. Like, it's like they push the envelope within the degree of power that they have. And in doing that, so like if you're an agent, you might say, I'm going to open up an investigation on X. Well, it's not really X that you want. You don't particularly like the guy, but within your power, you can do that. You're legally allowed to do it. Now, the catch becomes when people start asking questions like, well, why did you do that? What was the reason you did that? Oh, yeah, Joe Misfit. Joe Misfit. Like,
yeah.
Whether you want to call it deep state has so much connotation to it.
Yeah.
I think there are people who didn't want Trump elected. That's all. I honestly think it's that basic.
Didn't want Trump elected and felt that it was incumbent on them to take extraordinary steps to prevent his election.
Yes.
Which in most any other context would be recognized as extremely troubling encroachments into domestic politics by the national security apparatus.
But see, if you say
it's not supposed to be their territory, but because they view Trump as such a historic threat, then any reservations they might have about that kind of conduct really got set aside. And a lot of the people in the liberal class have countenanced that encroachment. And I think the fact that they have a lack of interest in Mifsud just kind of it shows that they don't want to really self-examine what they've given what they've lent credibility to. They lent credibility to a national security state move against a presidential candidate and then a sitting president that violated all kinds of quote norms and was predicated basically on eviction. And so if they were to look into the whole Mifsud matter, it would expose what they are responsible for, which was, I've been calling it a soft coup. It wasn't a full military coup, yeah. But if you were party to or complicit with a soft coup, then you don't want to necessarily investigate how that coup came about and your role in facilitating it, because again, it would make you look, as you pointed out, not just bad, but could implicate you in criminality.
I think they hate Trump. And I think it's an emotional thing of, for other people who are part of it, it's like, look, I just hate Trump. I just want him out of office. Look, I use it. My mom, the nicest person on the planet, nicest person you'd ever meet in your life.
Yeah.
And she would say, I hate Trump. I just want him out of office.
Yeah, I don't care. I don't care what does it.
I don't care what does it. Just get him out of office. Just get him away. Just get him away. Like, I think a lot of people are there. So Jim Jordan bringing up an extremely good point. I know he's a Republican. I don't care. He's bringing up an extremely good point. The media's like, yeah, we don't care about that. We need to impeach. Like, they don't care. In their mind, the narrative, not to mention, if you're the media and you ran with this narrative for 3 or 4 years, the last thing you want to find out is this was a conspiracy theory, and that you would have to, everything that people have been saying about you guys messing this up was true. You just kind of want to keep it moving. You want to stay with the narrative and keep that narrative intact. I mean, this is a propagandistic thing that we have in our media. But you don't. But again, this goes back to this thing. You don't think, like you think it's one of those things that media just kind of self-organizes themselves in a way.
Yeah. I mean, another
you were inside. That's why I'm asking you more so in this case. Because you would know.
I was just going to say that another example of this kind of unconscious self-organizing is the other story that we were going to talk about, which is these 302s from the FBI regarding Bruce Orr that were just revealed.
Yes, talk about it. Explain it.
Yeah. Well, the 302s are basically the notes that FBI agents take to memorialize their interviews with subjects of interest. And Bruce Orr was a Department of Justice official who was feeding information to the FBI in 2016 and 2017 regarding Trump's supposed ties with Russia, and eventually Trump himself caught onto this and has been tweeting about him and saying it's a disgrace that he's still around, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, that kind of makes journalists and liberals roll their eyes and say there must be nothing to this Bruce Orr situation. But if you look at what these 302s reveal, it's that Bruce Orr maintained contact with Christopher Steele after the FBI terminated Christopher Steele as a paid informant, because the FBI, or at least elements within the FBI, wanted Orr to serve as a conduit with Steele so they could continue receiving Steele's intelligence, which, as we know, turned out to be virtually entirely bogus. But if the FBI really wanted to maintain that much communication with Steele, then it shows you how desperate they were to maintain an ability to take down Trump, because they continued that line of communication after it should have become reasonably clear that there was virtually no...
There were conspiracy theories. I think, if I'm not mistaken, they would even use the term Kremlin conspiracy theory, something like that, for some of the stuff that was being spewed out, like in the documents that these guys were being paid for, by the way. Paid for these conspiracy theories. Paid for. And by the way, Fusion GPS. I mean, we're talking about, like, this is the place. Go ahead. I'll let you.
I was just going to say, so in terms of the media kind of self-organizing and kind of unconsciously crafting narratives, and maybe consciously in some respects, which organization actually acquired these FBI 302s? It wasn't the New York Times. It wasn't CNN. It wasn't NBC News. It was Judicial Watch, which is a conservative
organization,
transparency organization, which obviously is very pro-Trump. But nonetheless, they actually have the resources to file FOIA requests and then take the stonewalling agencies to court when they refuse to furnish the requested documents, and that's how they got these 302s. Now, why wasn't a news organization doing that? It's because they don't have the interest in getting to the bottom of how this massively unprecedented investigation came about and came to envelop the entire country. I mean, that seems like a pretty straightforward reason to want to get every little bit of information possible about all this stuff, and yet you don't have a whole lot of interest in it because it's regarded as sort of the purview of crazy right-wingers. And do a lot of crazy right-wingers latch onto it? Sure. But I think it's an indication of how unconsciously perpetuating of certain narratives that these media members are, that they would leave it to Judicial Watch to actually come out with this information. And some of it is pretty newsworthy. I mean, the fact that Steele is specifically described as somebody who passionately opposes Trump.
Yeah.
And yet they continue to cite the Steele dossier in the FISA warrant applications even after that point. I mean, that shows you that there was at the very least a blind spot within the FBI, or something potentially even more corrupt than that.
I think incompetence often tries to cover intention.
In terms of the machinations of how all this came together.
I think it's a big deal. I mean, the moment that Mueller comes out and says there's no connection between Trump and Russia, the very next question should have been, how did this happen? Right. Honestly, how does that not? Look, it's one thing if you come back and say, yes, he was working with the Russians. We got to do something. The president is a Russian plant. If that If that's when Mueller comes back, fair enough. Fair enough. You know, people can say, take issue with it and everything else. But if Mueller doesn't come back and say that, then the very next question should be, how on earth did this conspiracy theory take effect for the last 3 years? I mean, we almost took down a president.
But not only was that not the first question asked, the first question asked was, who's covering it up? Like, nobody wanted to accept. Nobody wanted to accept that Mueller actually did conclude that there was no conspiracy between Trump and Russia, which he very obviously did. The theory, the reaction then became Bill Barr must be covering it up. There must be some other chicanery behind the scenes, and oh, by the way, obstruction of justice was the big issue all along, which, I mean, give me a break.
They jumped immediately to obstruction of justice. Like on the same newscast. I watched them as they read the Mueller report, and they said, okay, there's no connection between, but obstruction. On the obstruction, I was like, what? Wait, can we linger a moment of the no connection thing? I mean, for fuck's sake. Yeah. This has been 3 years. But
we're now at a point where, because there is so little self-examination in the media, so little accountability, and so little introspection, that because of the immediate pivot to the Bill Barr conspiracy and the corruption of justice, we're now at a point now where there are, according to Gerald Nadler, the House Judiciary Committee chairman, official impeachment proceedings currently underway, and Nadler states that part of what is under investigation, pursuant to these impeachment proceedings, is Trump's collusion with Russia. So, because we have an immediate environment, I'm 100% serious.
But the only reason. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. That's amazing.
But the only reason why that's possible is because the media ecosystem is so broken, where anybody in their right mind could still be of the belief that Trump colluded with Russia.
I found it to be extraordinary.
So Nadler and the other Democrats just exist in that media environment, and you have 100 or over more than a majority now, probably like 60% nearly, Democrats in the House of Representatives officially calling for impeachment proceedings, and Gerald Nadler just confirmed that those are underway.
These spineless worms
that's where we're at.
Go after Bush. Think about that. These spineless worms of Democrats didn't have the balls to go after Bush. George Bush invaded a country on the premise of a lie, and resulted in over 1 million people dying in the country, let alone still being in those wars today, let alone the chaos that was wrought when all of those people went fleeing into other countries, talking about Europe and everything else. Bush is finger painting right now. When Obama got in office, Obama said we got to look forward. We can't look back. And that's even on top of torture. That's after Bush saying, I said, damn right, hell yeah, border begin or something. I guess my point is, they're going after Trump on hush money payments. Think about this. That's what we're saying. You just had the article. I'm going to do the video after I finish this video because I just saw it in the Wall Street Journal. Hush money payments and obstruction of justice. Of what type of justice? Something that didn't exist. And they're saying that's enough to go after Donald Trump. But George Bush, not so much.
Yeah, Trump obstructed a fairy tale, essentially. So therefore, we must impeach. You mentioned the interview that I did with Dennis Kucinich. Dennis Kucinich was the member of Congress who introduced the articles of impeachment against not just Bush, but Cheney in 2007. And so I was curious to hear from Dennis Kucinich what he thought about this current push to impeach Trump on the basis of Russia, because when Kucinich introduced those articles of impeachment, he got very few co-sponsors, and it basically went nowhere.
Think about that.
Kucinich, who again was the person who introduced the articles of impeachment against Bush and Cheney, said, "There's no grounds really to impeach Trump. What are these people talking about?
What are they talking about? Exactly. It comes across as overtly political. I mean, the public doesn't support it. That's the first point. Elizabeth Warren comes out and is like, I waited until I read the report, but now I'm certain we got to impeach him. And it's like, get out of here. Get out of here. Like, you knew what you were going to do before Mueller opened his mouth, before this report came out. You knew what you were going to do. All of these people are being overtly political, and I'm sorry, I don't support this. And I think there's a lot of people in the public who may hate Trump, who may go along with it because they hate Trump. but the fact that they tried to impeach him for being racist, literally something that they tried to do. They tried to impeach him for a tweet, something they tried to do, and now this.
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought that the writing was on the wall for this in terms of impeachment, because people are just too dug into the narrative, and there's too much emotional fervor around anything anti-Trump, as you kind of mentioned. That if this is the one vehicle that they have available to them to reproach Trump in the most official way possible, then they're going to go with it, even though it's really propped up on a foundation of nonsense. And the writing was on the wall when Elizabeth Warren came out, and right after the Mueller report was released and called for impeachment proceedings, and then basically every other Democratic candidate followed suit, with the exception of Biden and Tulsi for different reasons. But that just showed you that the momentum was kind of ineluctably going in one direction on the Democratic Party. And therefore, now we're at a point where Nadler's all but confirming that they're going to refer articles of impeachment to the full House in probably October or November.
There's absurd and there's absurd. Like, this is absurd on its face. I mean, you're impeaching him for obstruction of justice. Basically, that's what they're saying. But the justice that he's obstructing didn't take place. Like, there was no justice.
And not just obstruction of justice. I mean, this is something that I've written about.
Well, you said they're talking about the Russia stuff. I am curious to see.
They're still talking about collusion. They're still talking about collusion. I mean, I did an article in the New York Daily News in June where I spoke to a bunch of the presidential candidates. And the question I have for them was, okay, you've called for the impeachment of Trump, or at least impeachment proceedings. Do you believe that collusion should be a part of those proceedings, or do you view that now as a settled issue, given that Mueller concluded that there was no conspiracy between Trump and Russia that could be established? And several of the candidates said that collusion was not a settled issue, and in fact required further investigation and ought to be a part of any impeachment proceedings.
I've spoken to people who talk that
including Gillibrand, de Blasio, who else? There are a couple others. So this is not something that many people in the Democratic Party accept as debunked. In fact, that they want it incorporated into the ultimate impeachment move that is brought against Trump within a couple months.
This is their Benghazi. This is Democrats' Benghazi.
But it's on a much grander scale. I mean, Republicans weren't stupid enough to try to impeach Obama on Benghazi.
Well, Democrats aren't that bright in this sense. Right. I mean, Republicans were bright enough to learn after the first time they went after Bill Clinton for a blowjob. They was like, all right, this didn't go too well. Let's cut this shit out. But this will create back and forth impeachments. Like, if they go for it, I guarantee you what is going to take place. They're going to do the same thing. Like, you've set the premise, and maybe the premise was set with Bill Clinton, and this kind of back and forth. Because my mom was like, well, they did that to Bill Clinton. I was like, that doesn't make it right, nor is that the function of impeachment. And not to mention, if you're going to impeach anybody, impeach Bush, not, a reality show host. It's like, come on, like the scale of this is so out of whack. Like, one guy invades a country, and, we're still in those wars today. And Bush is out there finger painting right now. They could not get, like you said, Kucinich put the things for impeachment, and they couldn't get any support on that. That's the guy who you should have gone after. Now, the thing is, I think the difference is Bush was out of office at that point. Trump is still in office, and they know Trump could potentially win again. And
they could have impeached Bush while he was in office. Like I said, Kucinich introduced those articles of impeachment in 2007.
No, I'm talking about at the point where Obama took office. The only thing they cared about is we won. We don't care anymore. That was their, they should have impeached Bush. Bush should have been impeached, because the fact of the matter is it would constrain the rest of the presidents that are coming after him if they did that. Impeaching Donald Trump impeaching Donald Trump on this is absurd. I'm sorry. And some of the bills, apparently Schiff is trying to put a bill out that would criminalize people reporting information that was like CIA dropped or something. Like, it's some of the stuff that these guys are talking about in response to it is extreme.
Well, there have been calls for legislation to criminalize the acceptance of any foreign information over the course of political campaign.
That's it.
So that has all kinds of First Amendment implications that, of course, people just totally ignore, because they think that there has to be some kind of policy remedy to prevent what happened with Trump and Russia ever taking place again, even though what happened with Trump and Russia was demonstrated to be almost a nothing.
Yeah.
But because they're so dug in, they have to come up with policy solutions to address a non-existent problem.
Conspiracy theory, yeah. It should address a conspiracy theory. That's sad. That's sad. This is the Democratic Party. This is the Democratic Party. Like, you know, it's sad when somebody like Tucker Carlson, who usually I don't particularly like, but sometimes says things that are just, you know, like it will point out the anti-war stuff. And how, like, the left in this kind of, you know, the Democratic Party is essentially a war party in as much, ever so much as the Republican Party, not more so. You know, there's, yeah. Is there anything else you want to talk about dealing with the Russia stuff that I might have missed? I think we've gone all over the place. I wanted to talk, I just wanted to bring up the stuff that recently came out. I know this is one of those things that you've been following. I follow it, and there's sometimes where I'm like, there's no way this is right. And I was like, I need to bring in Michael Tracey on this to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly.
No, I think you're on the mark.
Mike, this is horrible. I mean, honestly, man, this is like there are political consequences to this.
I know, and we see those political consequences in all kinds of areas. I mean, it was just a joke, but yesterday, like, Kamala Harris was at some event in Iowa, and her sound dropped out, you know, and she again, I understand it was a joke, but she said, oh, it's the Russians.
The Russians. Well, she's been saying that the Russians have been trying to get her campaign. She's been saying then that the Tulsi Gabbard was pushed by the Russians. This is nonsense.
Right. Which is why it goes beyond that one, you know, somewhat a significant joke. But the fact that that's a punchline that people automatically recognize at all should be worrying. But yeah, I mean, Kamala's people have been pushing this idea that Tulsi was backed by Russia.
Well, it goes further than that, by the way.
And they've been using that. They've been using that as a substitute for political argument, and that's a result of the narrative that has been pushed for 3 years without any real sustained opposition by people who are not just reflexive Trump partisans, but actually have a grounding in logic and reason and the ability to call out BS.
Trump has been pulling out of,
and that's why this narrative is not. People who thought that it was going to have gone away after Mueller released his report.
Not so much.
You're wrong. You're still wrong, and that's the best evidence for that now is that we're moving toward impeachment.
Russia has been pulling out of the missile treaties, one after the next, and I've had the opportunity to watch a video where Putin was given an interview, and in that interview, he kind of made this point, like, you know, this is not a joke, this is not a game. Like this is foreign policy. I think sometimes the U.S. trivializes politics, especially foreign policy, with a certain degree of brinksmanship, because we have such, you know, somewhat of an esteemed position in regards to power, power from the standpoint of military power. But other countries have had to deal with invasions and wars, and those countries look at that stuff in a very different way as opposed to this lighthearted way that the U.S. kind of politics gets sometimes. This cartoonish way we do politics. Trump has been pulling out of one missile treaty after the next because John Bolton doesn't believe in missile treaties. And in pulling out of those treaties, I would imagine the argument is a country that has an advantage should not level off its advantage by having a missile treaty in order to blunt the advantage. We should accentuate the advantage and try to make further gains. That's a problem. And this is like the second or third treaty that he's pulled out of. And the media is still screaming that Trump is in collusion with the Russians. You know what I mean? Like, it hides the stuff. Like, this notion that, oh, Trump is working with the Russians. It's like, yeah, but he pulled out of the INF treaty. Yeah, but he's really working with them behind the scenes. Well, he just pulled out this other treaty recently. Well, he's working with them behind the scenes. Russia doesn't seem to know that he's working with them behind the scenes. I guess my point is, the Russia and Trump meme hides real stuff that Trump is doing that is creating opposition from a foreign policy standpoint with either Russia or Russian interests, be it Venezuela or Iran. Russia was just holding military exercises with Iran and is talking about selling Iran those missile systems. They're not doing that for willy-nilly. They're doing that even though in the past they said they wouldn't do it. They're doing it now. It's in the open. China has been engaging with elements of like Venezuela or something like that when the U.S. has been engaging with elements of Hong Kong screwing with China. Like, this is a big deal. And our media has been...
You're touching on one of the most damaging functions of the Russia meme, as you call it, from the beginning, which is that it's trivialized U.S. foreign policy decision making,
Yes.
and it's kind of filtered it through this very reductive, simplistic, and often just totally wrong prism of Trump being compromised by Russia and therefore taking all these actions on their behest. It's inhibited the ability of journalists, people in the intelligentsia, people across the spectrum from really grappling with the consequences of U.S. foreign policy because they've kind of used this Trump Russia narrative as a shorthand for understanding the complexities.
Yeah.
And I think that's really dangerous, especially in a country like the U.S., which is still the world's sole monolithic, sole hegemonic power in terms of how it wields military force all abroad. And for people to have such a warped perception of how that military force and economic force is being wielded and reduce everything to this very just tedious and almost conspiratorial Trump-Russia framework, it's done long-lasting damage, and that's something I've tried to highlight from the very beginning, and that's why you don't have a whole lot of pushback now when Trump rescinds U.S. participation in these nuclear treaties, and it's going to really, I think, distort, in particular, the foreign policy discussion among Democrats in 2020. But this is all very predictable. This is all something that I try to warn about, and a couple others. But we're now going to live with the consequences.
I don't know if you've seen the various countries that said, "Yeah, you're not putting your missiles in our country." Like that's what we're talking about now. Trump putting missiles, or the U.S. trying to get missiles in various countries in Europe as this missile war goes off. And that's not even the space stuff, like the weapons in space, the ballistic treaties in space that Trump is like, yeah, we're not going to be in that either now. Like all of that stuff is now off the table. Hey, India is talking about their missiles in space. Yep. China is talking about putting missiles in space. All of these countries, they have to. They don't have a choice at this point.
Jamal, your connection's sort of been breaking up a little bit, so I can hear like bits and pieces of what you're saying. Do you want to just wrap up here? So
yeah. All right. So, dude, I really appreciate you coming on, and let me I have one or two super chats that I think people want to kind of.
Oh yeah, no problem.
Give. All right. So one, Kamala Tulsi feud started when Harris opposed the First Step Act. Kamala Harris opposed the First Step Act.
No, that's exactly the commenter is exactly right. That's what Tulsi was referring to in the interview that I did with her, where Kamala Harris, she ultimately voted for it, but Tulsi's point was that she had been opposed throughout a large portion of the process and hadn't actually been involved in the crafting of the bill, and seemingly opposed it simply because it would have given Trump a win. She did end up also voting for it, but Tulsi was criticizing her approach legislatively to that bill, as it was being compiled. So that commenter is correct.
She said, "You're not fit to be commander in chief." That's strong. All right, Jimmy Dore's coming to Brooklyn. Secular Cal is Mike. Oh, I didn't know if they were coming to Brooklyn. Tune at 20. I wasn't aware they were coming to Brooklyn, and I don't know who. I don't. Oh, I see Tracey. Mercedes Cali. So glad you got.
People ask me about that all the time. Yeah, I will be at one of the Jimmy Dore shows in Brooklyn. So if you're there, so you can say hello.
Oh, cool. Okay. Mercedes Cali. So glad you got Tracey on. I was watching him earlier today. Yeah, Tracey's been on what 2-3 times. This is your third time. John McCarthy. Tulsi's mad at Kamala for opposing the First Step Act. Yeah, apparently a lot of my audience know why she was pissed off at her. And do I have Streamlabs? I've had to close a lot of my systems because I didn't want my system to freeze up while you were on, because this is kind of a thing. But there may be one more, and we can call it the day after that. Dude, I appreciate you hanging out with me on a Sunday.
Yeah, I always enjoy it.
Yeah, it's like a slow Sunday. Okay, that's it, dude. I really appreciate this, man. The indomitable. I'm staying with indomitable. You don't want to own it, but I'm owning it. Goddamn it. The indomitable Michael Tracey. Thanks, man.
If you insist. All I ask is people go to my YouTube channel and subscribe.
What's your channel name?
Like commentaries and interviews. It's just called M Tracey, MTRACEY. I put on like candidate interviews, other interviews, podcasts. Every day or so, I'll just do a short kind of commentary style video. But there's a variety of stuff on there, so take a look. I have had some okay growth lately, and we'll see what happens.
I told people, I said, before you and I got on, I said, God, man, I was so jealous about that Kucinich interview. He said, yeah. I had hooks with Kucinich. You've had Papadopoulos, you've had Kucinich, you've had Gabbard. I mean, you've had some extraordinarily good interviews on the channel, man. So you've been kicking ass, so keep kicking ass. And I'll put a link to your channel at the bottom of this video so people will have it. All right, man.
All right, thank you.
I'm Tracey. All right, guys, thank you
and,
all. Something else?
You okay?
No.
You good?
Oh wait. Oh yeah.
No. I was just gonna say you broke up again. So it was.
My bad. I was gonna end it here. All right, guys. Y'all, if you enjoy the content, like, share. You can always subscribe. Thanks all. I'll see you guys in a few.